welcome to Represents. I'm truly honored today to have my friend Andrea Menard, aka Métis Auntie, anti-colonial scholar. She was named top 25 most influential lawyer, I believe it was in last year, 2023, in the Canadian Lawyer magazine. Her work as an educator was focused on shedding light on the impact of colonialism and systemic discrimination. How are you?
I'm great, Ray. How are you doing?
I'm good. Happy New Year. It's great to see you.
Yes, great to see you too. It's cold
Yes.
here, so cold. I don't know if it's cold over there.
It's cold here too, my friend, unfortunately.
It's a good day to talk.
It's a great day to talk. So listen, can you share with me some of your experiences and insights, as you like to say, as a white-coated Indigenous person combating racism?
Yeah, so thanks for that question, Ray. So it's really interested, being white coded, that means white passing. So I basically don't fit in anywhere. So people may actually think I'm a pretend Indian. I think that might go through their minds first because I am taking up Indigenous space. That's my main passion in life. I've been with Indigenous communities, working for Indigenous communities for the past 30 years. But I look white. So when I go, so when colonial institutions like Canadian institutions want to hire me, whether it be in the academic field, the legal field, the nonprofit field, and the government field, I've worked in all, they might think that I can, because I'm white looking, I'll acquiesce to their colonial guidelines, and that I'm indeed not Indigenous because I don't look Indigenous, but I am Indigenous inside. So that's a barrier that I face. It's almost systemically racist because people think that Indigenous peoples look one way. Well, we look all different types of ways. But it's also really interesting because when I go into Indigenous communities, they also think I'm white. So I have to, because my body is, all of our bodies are political, and because race white settlers have come in and done some extreme damage to Indigenous communities, I have to prove myself. Well, of course, I tell them who my ancestors are, who my family is. That's the first question they ask. That's protocol. But then after that, because I'm privileged. I'm privileged because I look white. So I still have some things that they throw in my way, like some tests that they throw in my way. So I'm still an outsider.
Give me an example, if you don't mind.
Well, am I gonna balk at the way that they go about things? So say I'm sitting around a community table in an Indigenous community, right? Am I gonna freak out that I'm losing control? Because they'll do stuff, and so Indigenous peoples were very we do visual. There's visual cues that we have that a lot of race white settlers don't get. So we'll look at each other, or just like really slight modifications physically. But I noticed that they can't keep that from me. So anyway, say if we have an agenda, and if I make the agenda, that's not good because I'm an outsider, no matter who I am. But if we make the agenda together, or if they make the agenda, that's better, right? If I come in all colonial-like with an agenda, the game's over. I'm not getting anywhere with that, right? It's co-partnership, learning how to listen, relax, understand, self-reflect. How am I coming across, right? And being able to be flexible at the table, and then you have to go back with the message, hey, we didn't get anything done, we just talked all afternoon, which is great for me. But I mean, when I go back to these settler institutions, they want answers. Well, they're not going to get any answers. It's all about relationship building and trust for a really long time.
What you said earlier in your response, you said, well, obviously, I'm white looking, right? Recently, I can't escape this question. I have to ask you. There's been controversy around a Canadian icon, Buffy St Marie, and in regards to her Indigenous background. What are your thoughts about it, first of all, and how do you think it impacts the broader conversation about Indigenous identity?
Yeah. So the leaders on the Indigenous front for this are Professor Kim Tolbert
Okay.
and lawyer Jean Taillet.
Mm-hmm.
And so they've been doing a lot of work on this. But when it came out that Buffy St Marie was not Indigenous, I've never liked her music, and I was like, why? But no, I mean she's an icon in a lot of Indigenous communities, and we were really hurt by that. So basically, in my opinion, Buffy St Marie is a fraud, and she should be treated like a fraud. But for Indigenous peoples, it's a very sensitive topic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I have to remember that I'm also in the public eye talking about other people's experiences. So the issue of identity is really sensitive because we don't want a government identity, because the government has ruined our lives. So even if we're from an Indigenous community, it's still under the Indian Act, where we're still getting a status card under the Indian Act. That's
Mm-hmm.
still colonial. So we have some issues with that. And then also in Canada, we don't necessarily do blood quantum, but we kind of do. So, because in the States they do blood quantum,
Mm-hmm.
and in the States, yeah. Anyway, so in Canada we say we don't, but we kind of do because there's status and non-status. So if you have, a treaty parents, but then they married a white parent, or grandparents, and they married a white person, then it goes down a couple generations, you are basically non-status, and if you're still living in the Indigenous community, you're a non-status Indigenous person. So that's really sensitive area, but there are a lot of people posing as Indigenous and taking advantage of us and our culture and appropriating our culture. And also, what they're doing is they're fitting in to white settler culture. White settlers really like the pretend Indians because they fit in, because they're actually white. So Buffy St Marie really fit in. We got Michelle Latimer. She really fit in. She's a filmmaker, a Canadian filmmaker. She was saying that she's Indigenous. Joseph Boyden, he was super famous. He's saying he's Indigenous. He's not. People really resonated with his writing. But we have a lot of Indigenous authors, filmmakers, poets that don't really resonate with the race white settler crowd. And why
Mm-hmm.
is that? Well, it's because we are Indigenous. So it really affects Indigenous people. Buffy St. Marie, it really hurt us. We were really hurt when it came out. Of course, there's some people saying she is. I don't believe she is. Even if a community has accepted her, it's she isn't. So yeah. So a lot of people think I'm pretend Indian. So that's also really interesting. As we're all moving forward as Indigenous people, who is a pretend Indian and who is not. A lot of academic institutions are making us show our cards. Some people think it's fine. Some people think it's not because it's another colonial power play saying you got to do this, you got to do that. But what do we do? What are we doing? There's a lot of people gaining and profiting off of this pretend Indian debacle that we're in. And I can only say that it's because of colonialism that this has happened. People resonate with people who are that fit into society. So again, like the pretend Indians fit into society, so they're applauded. They rise to the top really fast, but they're not in.
Tell me, Andrea, in your work as a lawyer, as a researcher, a scholar, tell me some of the challenges that you've faced in addressing, colonial structures that you mentioned affecting Indigenous rights.
Yeah. Well, it's really embedded. And the thing is that we are on Indigenous land. Canadians are on Indigenous land. This is all Indigenous land, whether we sign treaties or not. The treaties were never honored, right? So everyone is on unceded land. And of course, people don't like that. Canada knows, and they're trying to get into agreements with Métis, so I'm Métis, with the Métis and with First Nations and with Inuit in order to have certainty over the land because they want our land. So we're getting into agreements with them, but I say, no, don't get into agreements with them, right? So I really like what a lot of First Nations are doing in British Columbia, say at the Wet'suwet'en, right? They're getting their hereditary chiefs in. So those hereditary chiefs come from our Indigenous laws and our Indigenous cultures, right? They're not under the Indian Act. They're not chief and council under the Indian Act. They're hereditary. They're part of the clan, right? That they all constructed in their own laws over in the Wet'suwet'en. So I'm really liking what's going on in British Columbia. They're really strong. They're really saying no. But again, so I go into these organizations and it's very, very colonial, and they expect me. They'll hire me as an Indigenous in an Indigenous position, and they'll expect me to talk out of both sides of my mouth. So they'll expect me. I'm in a tokenized position, and they'll expect me to toe the line and listen to them. And really, I'm trying to listen to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and I'm trying to decolonize everything. And what's happening is they're not ready to. Organizations, institutions, academia, society are not ready to listen. So then I become a pest. then I become the rebel. Then I become the person who's disruptive, rude, and I'm unsettling everything. When really, I am just trying to educate and make people aware that the land that you're on is Indigenous. And we have our own Indigenous laws that are deeply embedded in this land, and we can help. I'm not asking for Indigenous peoples to take over. I'm asking for a multi-juridical society. I'm asking for a pluralistic society. We've done it with English Canada and French Canada. There is a third way, that's Indigenous way, right? What is holding people up? 160 years of colonialism here in this country, deeply embedded. Can't get around it. It's very, very hard for people. They don't understand how to decolonize, even though I'm trying to give them action items of how. And so we've come up to, I don't know if you've noticed this, Ray, that the Truth and Reconciliation, they're dropping all of the Yellowhead Institute. They're just dropping their inquests. They studied across Canada who's practicing Truth and Reconciliation, and unfortunately, it's abysmal. So no one is really practicing. They're practicing in a superficial and performative way that is not doing any good for Indigenous peoples, and I would say marginalized peoples here in Canada, because I think that they suffer under settler colonialism as well. So things aren't great, but I love it that we are gathering together. We're getting communities, diverse communities. We're getting together and saying, hey, what can we do? Right? How can we get together and talk about this? Whether you're Indigenous or whether you're Black, whether you come from a marginalized community, we're starting to grow. And lastly, the younger generation. There's a groundswell. The younger generation kind of get it, right? They get it more. They're really emotionally intelligent. And they're really looking around the world going, what has happened? Why don't we get the same choices? Why don't we have the same, as the Gen X's or baby boomers? So I really like talking to the younger generation because they know.
What are they saying right now? The younger generation that you've encountered, in your different lectures, etc.
Yeah, that the older generation is basically in a fugue state, that they're not getting the emotional component of how to heal society, whether it be like through law, right? Because I teach law courses, I teach human rights courses, um, and yeah, I intersect with a lot of younger people, and there's a big disconnect, there's a big gap, and they have really progressive ways of looking at the world and of healing the world, right? And they want to look at Indigenous ways to heal the world. They're more open to it. I don't know if it's because maybe they didn't grow up as disassociated with what has been happening in Canada. Canada has lied to the Gen X's and the baby boomers about what's happened in Canada, of the genocide, of the residential schools, of the kids that have died and are buried at residential schools, of the colonialism. I don't know. This younger generation, they seem to get it, and I really appreciate that perspective that they have.
You know what? I like to talk to people like you in this field who you are, devoted to this. And I always like to ask them what sparked that, that devotion, that drive to fight for rights. Well, what is there a moment, a specific moment, or you just knew that, hey, this is what I'm going to do, and I know it's going to take a toll mentally, etc. But what did it for you?
I didn't know it was going to take a toll mentally. I mean, there's no choice. There's no choice in the matter.
Yes.
Okay, so what happened was, my dad was Métis. He died early, and traumatically. My Métis side of my family, they all kind of left. They didn't really, they weren't involved in my brother and I growing up. I was a single mom, single white mom, and so I realized, I wasn't really fitting into my white family and their values just naturally. I was like, why are they like this? So then, and this is like a 13 years old, right? I'm like, I'm not fitting in with these people. I'm like, what's going on with my dad and his side of the family? And so I started writing my Métis grandfather. I'm like, hey, what's up? What's happened? Da, 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 da. And this is before email, so I had to write letters. And he told me, yes, we're Indigenous. Yes, his mom went to day school, residential school, and he started talking. And my Métis side of the family had trauma as well as my dad, like it's passed down intergenerationally. Then I came at this nexus, like where I wasn't doing too well in life. Why wasn't I doing too well in life? I had everything going for me. And I thought there's something with what's happened in my Métis family. I just knew intuitively. There's something that's happening in my Métis family that is creating barriers for me, whether it be because I think in a different way, like I think more holistically. I can't categorize like how Canadian colonial education systems used to teach us. I wasn't competitive. I wanted to be more collaborative. That's very much an Indigenous way where we're talking amongst each other and we're coming up with really great solutions. I just was having a hard time with the status quo. And so I started getting into what does it mean to be Indigenous today? And then I didn't know that it was going to be that hard, but it's deeply enriching. It's a deeply enriching journey because it's a deeper journey. It's a very painful journey because there's a lot of backlash. There's a lot of misunderstandings. There's a lot of white fragility. There's a lot of white people moving to white innocence. There's a lot of blaming. And there's a lot to learn. I learned the hard way. And there's a lot to learn through Indigenous communities as well, right? Because I wasn't raised to know the protocols that all Indigenous communities have.
Mm-hmm.
So anyways, it was being in between two worlds and knowing that there was something going on that I needed to figure out.
Yeah, yeah. Tell me what aspects of Indigenous culture or heritage do you think that the broader public should better understand it or appreciate?
Well, we're on Indigenous land, so Canada is a new, like basically a colony, and it's only 160 years old. So if we want to solve issues that we're seeing today, and I'm not saying Indigenous issues, right? If we want to solve the problems that we're seeing today, whether it be the climate, the society, the way education is going, whatever, the answers lie in the land that we're on. Indigenous peoples inherently and have a depth of knowledge that can't even be described in the English language with the land and the animals and the environment. So if we want to improve our health across the country, I'm not talking about Indigenous people, we want to improve our overall health, if we want to improve our overall ways that our organizations and institutes treat one another, like for equity, diversity, and inclusion, we have to learn Indigenous ways. We just do, because they know best, because we are, I switch all the time, because we are inherently connected, interconnected, and also Indigenous languages. Knowing an Indigenous language will greatly improve our lives, because Indigenous languages are interconnected with this land that we're on. And they're all verbs. So it's not like, hey, you over there. It's all of us together holistically. It's like we're equal with the animals. We're equal with the water. The water has life. And if we start to understand Indigenous languages, I think we'll all start to heal as a society.
Andrea, I'd like to thank you for your time. This was eye-opening, and I know a lot of people will learn from it, and I hope we continue these dialogues, this discussion, to learn more from each other. Thank you very much.
Meg Thank you.
Thank you.